tears streamed down 12-year-old Marcus Thompson's face as passengers laughed at his desperate attempts to ask for water. The flight attendant rolled her eyes and mimicked his stutter while other travelers recorded the humiliation. What she didn't know was that the boy's mother, sitting 3 rows behind in economy, was recording everything too. And what nobody knew was that Marcus's grandfather owned 47% of the airline through his investment empire. One phone call would ground every plane in the fleet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thompson family estate in Westchester County, New York. 12-year-old Marcus Thompson sat at the kitchen island, carefully practicing his speech exercises while his mother, Dr. Keisha Thompson, prepared breakfast. His small hands gripped a piece of paper containing the tongue twisters his speech therapist had assigned him for the summer. Marcus had been working with his stutter since he was 7 years old. What had started as a mild hesitation in his speech had become more pronounced after his parents' divorce 2 years earlier. Now, certain sounds became impossible mountains to climb, particularly when he felt nervous or excited. The letter W was his biggest challenge, followed closely by S sounds that seemed to tangle in his throat like stubborn knots. Red leather, yellow leather, he whispered to himself, his brow furrowed in concentration. The exercise was designed to help with his R and L sounds, which had improved significantly over the past year. His speech therapist, Mrs. Patricia Nguyen, had taught him breathing techniques and strategies for managing his stutter, but Marcus still felt frustrated when words wouldn't come out the way he heard them in his mind. Dr. Keisha Thompson watched her son with a mixture of pride and concern. As a pediatric cardiologist at Mount Sinai Hospital, she understood the medical aspects of speech disorders, but as a mother, she felt every moment of Marcus's struggle as if it were her own. She had researched every treatment option, consulted with the best specialists, and ensured Marcus received the support he needed both academically and emotionally. Marcus attended Riverside Preparatory Academy, a private school in Manhattan that specialized in supporting students with learning differences. His teachers were trained in speech disorders, and his classmates had grown accustomed to giving him the time he needed to express himself. In this protected environment, Marcus thrived academically, particularly excelling in mathematics and science, where his analytical mind could work without the pressure of verbal communication. Today was different, though. Today, Marcus would be traveling alone for the first time in his life. His father, Robert Thompson, lived in Los Angeles, where he worked as a film producer. Marcus spent summers with his father, but this year would mark his first unaccompanied flight across the country. The arrangement had been carefully planned with the airline's unaccompanied minor services, and both parents had prepared Marcus extensively for the journey. The divorce had been amicable, with both parents prioritizing Marcus's well-being above their own conflicts. Robert Thompson had initially opposed the idea of Marcus flying alone, worried that his son's stutter might create complications or misunderstandings during travel. However, Dr. Thompson had advocated for independence, believing that Marcus needed opportunities to navigate the world on his own terms. Marcus had been excited about the trip for weeks. His father had promised to take him to Universal Studios, the Santa Monica Pier, and even a behind-the-scenes tour of a movie studio where Robert was currently working on a superhero film. For a 12-year-old boy fascinated by special effects and storytelling, it represented the adventure of a lifetime. What neither Marcus nor his mother knew was the extent of the family's hidden wealth and influence. Dr. Thompson's father, Theodore Beaumont Thompson, had built a financial empire over 40 years that included significant holdings in transportation, technology, and entertainment companies. Theodore had deliberately kept his business dealings separate from his family life, wanting his daughter and grandson to develop their own identities without the complications that came with extreme wealth. Theodore Beaumont Thompson, known as TB to his business associates, had started with a small investment firm in the 1980s and had grown it to Apex Capital Management, one of the most powerful private equity firms in the country. His investment strategy focused on acquiring substantial stakes in companies with strong fundamentals but poor management, then working behind the scenes to improve operations and profitability. Among his many holdings was a 47% stake in Horizon Airlines, a mid-sized carrier that served routes throughout the United States. Theodore had acquired his position in Horizon 5 years ago, when the airline was facing bankruptcy, and his capital injection had saved the company from collapse. While he maintained voting control as the largest shareholder, he rarely interfered with day-to-day operations, preferring to work through quarterly board meetings and annual strategic reviews. Marcus knew his grandfather was successful in business, but the 12-year-old had no concept of the true scale of Theodore's influence. To Marcus, Grandpa Theodore was simply the man who taught him chess, took him to baseball games, and always had time to listen to his questions about how things worked. Theodore had been careful to maintain a normal grandfather relationship with Marcus, never wanting his wealth to overshadow the genuine bond they shared. The flight from LaGuardia to Los Angeles International was scheduled to depart at 11:30 a.m. on Horizon Airlines Flight 847. Dr. Thompson had chosen Horizon specifically because of their reputation for excellent customer service and their comprehensive unaccompanied minor program. She had spoken with the airline's special services coordinator 3 times in the past week, ensuring that every detail of Marcus's journey had been planned and communicated to the flight crew. As they prepared to leave for the airport, Marcus practiced his introduction one more time. "Hi, my name is Marcus Thompson. I'm traveling to Los Angeles to visit my father." His stutter made the W sound and was challenging, but he had learned to substitute easier words when possible. "I am going to Los Angeles to see my dad," he corrected himself, finding the flow much smoother. Dr. Thompson had prepared a detailed letter for the flight attendants explaining Marcus's speech disorder and providing strategies for communication. The letter emphasized that Marcus was highly intelligent and independent, but might need extra patience during verbal interactions. She had also included emergency contact information for both herself and Robert, along with details about Marcus's pickup arrangements in Los Angeles. The drive to LaGuardia Airport took 45 minutes through morning traffic. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, reviewing the speech exercises Mrs. Nguyen had taught him for managing anxiety. He knew that his stutter became more pronounced when he felt nervous or rushed, so he practiced the breathing techniques that helped him maintain control over his speech patterns. At the airport, Dr. Thompson accompanied Marcus through security and to the gate, where they met with Jennifer Walsh, the Horizon Airways Special Services Coordinator. Jennifer had worked with unaccompanied minors for 8 years and immediately put both Marcus and his mother at ease with her warm, professional demeanor. "We will take excellent care of Marcus," Jennifer assured Dr. Thompson. "I've briefed the flight crew about his needs, and flight attendant Sandra Mitchell will be his primary contact during the journey. Sandra has 15 years of experience and has worked with many children who have speech differences." Marcus felt confident as he said goodbye to his mother. The preparation had been thorough, and he was excited about the adventure ahead. He had his tablet loaded with games and movies, a book about movie special effects, and his collection of fidget toys that helped him stay calm when his stutter felt overwhelming. What Marcus and his family didn't know was that Sandra Mitchell had called in sick that morning, and her replacement was Rebecca Anderson, a newer flight attendant with a very different attitude toward passenger service. Rebecca Anderson came from a background of financial struggle and harbored resentments about serving what she perceived as privileged passengers. At 26, she had worked multiple jobs to support herself through college and viewed her flight attendant position as a temporary stepping stone rather than a career. Her interactions with passengers often reflected this underlying frustration, particularly when dealing with children or passengers she deemed demanding.
The substitution had been made without updating the Special Services Coordinator, a breakdown in communication that would prove catastrophic. As Marcus boarded the plane, carrying his small backpack and clutching the identification lanyard that marked him as an unaccompanied minor, he had no idea that the carefully planned support system his mother had arranged was no longer in place. The Boeing 737 was configured with first class, business class, and economy sections. Marcus had been assigned a window seat in the first row of economy, specifically chosen so the flight crew could easily monitor him throughout the journey. As he settled into his seat, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about the 5-hour flight ahead. Other passengers were still boarding as Marcus organized his carry-on items and familiarized himself with the seat belt and tray table. He had flown many times with his parents, but never alone, and every detail felt more significant when he was responsible for managing everything himself. The breathing exercises Mrs. Nguyen had taught him helped him stay calm as the cabin filled with travelers. Rebecca Anderson noticed the unaccompanied minor lanyard as she performed her pre-flight duties, but the communication breakdown meant she had no information about Marcus's speech disorder or the special considerations his mother had arranged. Her first impression was of a well-dressed child from an obviously wealthy family, which immediately triggered her class-based resentments. As the plane prepared for departure, Marcus felt ready for his adventure. He had successfully navigated airport security, found his gate, and settled into his seat without any major communication challenges. His confidence was growing, and he looked forward to telling his father about his successful journey when he landed in Los Angeles. The stage was set for what should have been a routine flight across the country. Instead, it would become a journey that exposed the cruelest aspects of discrimination and ultimately transformed an entire industry's approach to passenger dignity and inclusion. The Boeing 737 lifted off from LaGuardia Airport precisely on schedule at 11:30 a.m. Marcus pressed his face to the window, watching New York City shrink below him as they climbed through the clouds. This was the moment he had been anticipating for weeks, and despite his nervousness about traveling alone, excitement overwhelmed his anxiety. The first hour of the flight passed smoothly. Marcus occupied himself with a puzzle game on his tablet, occasionally glancing out the window at the patchwork of farmland and cities below. His breathing exercises were working well, and his stutter felt manageable. The hum of the engines and the gentle turbulence actually helped him relax, providing a rhythmic background that seemed to ease the tension he often carried in his throat and chest. Rebecca Anderson had been busy with the beverage service for first-class and business-class passengers, but now she was preparing to begin service in the economy cabin. She wheeled the heavy cart down the narrow aisle, mechanically offering drinks and snacks to passengers with the rehearsed smile she had perfected during her 18 months with Horizon Airways. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. When Rebecca reached Marcus's row, she noticed the unaccompanied minor lanyard again, but still had no information about his specific needs. Her training had covered the basics of working with children traveling alone, but the communication breakdown meant she was approaching the interaction without any understanding of Marcus's speech patterns or the patience he required. Marcus had been looking forward to this moment. His mother had given him $5 to buy a snack during the flight, and he had practiced asking for apple juice and pretzels. The words felt clear in his mind, and he had rehearsed the interaction several times during the first hour of the flight. Rebecca stopped the cart beside his seat and looked down at him with the automatic customer service expression she used with all passengers. "Beverage or snack?" she asked, in a tone that suggested she was already thinking about the next passenger in line. Marcus looked up at her and took a deep breath, employing the techniques Mrs. Nguyen had taught him. Could I please have some?" He paused, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat as he approached the W sound in water. The words seemed to stick, and he tried again. Water, please." Rebecca's expression immediately shifted from neutral politeness to visible irritation. She had never worked with passengers who had speech disorders, and her lack of training led her to make the worst possible assumption about Marcus's difficulty. "Are you making fun of me?" she asked sharply, her voice carrying clearly to passengers in nearby seats. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment and confusion. "No, man, I have trouble with—" The stutter was getting worse now, triggered by stress and the unexpected confrontation. "I wanted some water." Rebecca's annoyance deepened. She interpreted his struggle as deliberate mockery rather than a legitimate speech disorder. "Listen, kid, I don't have time for games. Just tell me what you want normally," she said, her tone becoming increasingly hostile. The interaction was drawing attention from other passengers. A woman across the aisle looked up from her magazine, and the businessman in the seat behind Marcus stopped typing on his laptop. The public nature of the confrontation made Marcus's stutter even more pronounced, creating a vicious cycle of stress and speech difficulty. "I'm trying to tell you," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. His hands were trembling now, and he felt the familiar shame that accompanied his worst stuttering episodes. Please, I just want some water." Rebecca rolled her eyes dramatically, a gesture that several passengers witnessed with growing discomfort. She had grown up in a household where disabilities were often mocked rather than understood, and her own financial struggles had created resentment toward anyone she perceived as privileged or attention-seeking. "Oh, come on," she said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "You can talk normally when you want to. Stop wasting everyone's time with this act." Several passengers began to murmur among themselves, some recording the interaction with their phones as Rebecca's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. This was his worst nightmare, the scenario that had kept him awake some nights before the trip. He had prepared for potential misunderstandings about his stutter, but he had never encountered such open hostility from an adult who was supposed to help him. I'm not acting," he managed to say, his voice breaking with emotion. "This is how I talk sometimes." Mrs. Nguyen always told him to explain his stutter clearly when people seemed confused. But Rebecca was beyond confusion now. She was actively hostile. Rebecca leaned closer to Marcus, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, really? Well, maybe if you spoke like a normal person, instead of putting on this little show, you'd get better service." Some passengers gasped audibly at her words, and several began recording more openly. The cruelty of her response stunned Marcus into silence. He had never encountered an adult who responded to his disability with such open mockery. Even strangers who didn't understand stuttering usually showed patience once he explained his condition. Rebecca's deliberate cruelness was beyond his experience. What Rebecca didn't know was that Dr. Keisha Thompson was seated 12 rows behind in economy class. She had decided at the last minute to take the same flight to Los Angeles, planning to surprise Marcus and spend a few days visiting her ex-husband and ensuring Marcus's transition went smoothly. She had deliberately booked a separate ticket and planned to reveal her presence only after takeoff. Dr. Thompson had been reading a medical journal when the commotion began, but Rebecca's raised voice had drawn her attention. When she realized the flight attendant was addressing her son, she began recording the interaction on her phone while moving closer to assess the situation. "You know what?" Rebecca continued, her voice now loud enough for most of the economy cabin to hear. "Maybe if your parents taught you how to speak properly instead of putting on this little show, you'd embarrass yourself on airplanes." The comment was so shocking that several passengers voiced their disapproval directly. Marcus began crying openly now, his shoulders shaking with the effort to control his sobs. The combination of humiliation, confusion, and hurt overwhelmed his ability to respond. He had never felt so helpless and exposed, trapped in his seat while an adult mocked the very thing he worked hardest to overcome. A passenger from 2 rows back stood up and approached the cart. "Excuse me, but this is completely inappropriate," the woman said firmly. "This child obviously has a speech impediment. You need to stop this immediately." The passenger was Elena Rodriguez, a special education teacher from Brooklyn who recognized the signs of a legitimate speech disorder. Rebecca turned her hostility toward the intervening passenger. "Ma'am, I'm handling this situation. Please return to your seat and let me do my job." Her defensive response only made her behavior appear more unreasonable to the growing number of witnesses. "Your job is to serve passengers respectfully," Alana responded. "This child asked for water, and instead of helping him, you're humiliating him. This is discrimination against a person with a disability." Elena's clear articulation of what was happening helped other passengers understand the severity of Rebecca's actions. Dr. Thompson had heard enough. She pushed past other passengers to reach her son's row, her medical training and maternal instincts combining into controlled fury. "Excuse me?" she said to Rebecca, in the voice she used when addressing incompetent hospital staff. "I'm this child's mother, and I'm also a physician. He has a diagnosed speech disorder, and your behavior constitutes disability discrimination." Rebecca's face showed a flicker of uncertainty for the first time. She had assumed Marcus was traveling alone and hadn't expected to face an articulate adult advocate. "Oh, I didn't know," she began, but Dr. Thompson cut her off. "It doesn't matter what you knew or didn't know," Dr. Thompson said clearly. "Your responsibility is to treat all passengers with dignity. Instead, you chose to mock a child's disability in front of an entire cabin of people." This conversation was being recorded by at least 6 passengers, and Rebecca was beginning to realize the gravity of her situation. "Look, maybe I misunderstood," Rebecca said, attempting to backtrack. But the damage was done. Marcus was still crying, dozens of passengers had witnessed her behavior, and multiple recordings of the incident were already being uploaded to social media platforms. Dr. Thompson knelt beside Marcus's seat and spoke to him gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. Mommy's here now. You did nothing wrong." The surprise of seeing her mother combined with relief at having an advocate caused Marcus to cry even harder, but now his tears were mixed with gratitude. The incident had transformed what should have been a routine beverage service into a viral moment that would define Rebecca Anderson's career and ultimately change the policies of an entire airline. As passengers continued recording and discussing what they had witnessed, the wheels were already in motion for consequences that would reach far beyond the confines of Flight 847. What none of them knew was that within hours, these recordings would reach Theodore Beaumont Thompson, and the most powerful shareholder in Horizon Airways would learn that his beloved grandson had been humiliated by one of the company's employees. The corporate response would be swift and unprecedented. The first video hit social media while Flight 847 was still cruising at 35,000 feet. Elena Rodriguez had uploaded a 30-second clip to her Twitter account with the caption, "Flight attendant mocks child with speech disorder on Horizon Airways. Absolutely disgusting behavior." The hashtag #HorizonShame was born at that moment. Within 20 minutes, the video had been retweeted over 2,000 times. Passengers throughout the economy cabin were no longer pretending to ignore what had happened. Many had their phones out, either recording follow-up videos or sharing their own accounts of Rebecca Anderson's behavior with Marcus Thompson. David Chin, a technology journalist seated in row 15, had captured the entire interaction from a different angle. His video showed Rebecca's facial expressions clearly, documenting her deliberate mockery and dismissive attitude. As a professional storyteller, David understood the power of the footage he had recorded and began live tweeting the incident as it unfolded. Captain William Hayes received notification of a disturbance in the cabin through the internal communication system. His first officer, Maria Santos, was monitoring air traffic communications when the call came in from the lead flight attendant, Jennifer Walsh, who had been working in first class during the incident. "Captain Hayes, we have a situation in the economy," Jennifer reported over the intercom. "There's been an incident involving Rebecca and an unaccompanied minor. Multiple passengers are extremely upset, and it appears to be escalating on social media." Hayes had 28 years of experience with various passenger situations, but the mention of social media complicated matters significantly. In the current environment, airline incidents could become national news within hours, affecting stock prices and corporate reputations. "What's the nature of the incident?" he asked. Jennifer had spoken with several passengers and understood the severity of what had occurred. Rebecca apparently mocked a child's speech impediment publicly. The child's mother is on board and confirming discrimination. We have multiple witnesses and recordings. The captain's expression hardened. He had children of his own and found the description deeply troubling. In addition to his personal reaction, his professional training recognized this as a potential crisis for the airline. "Schedule a call with Horizon Management immediately after we land, and move Rebecca to a back galley position for the remainder of the flight."
Meanwhile, Dr. Keisha Thompson was documenting everything methodically. As a physician, she understood the importance of thorough evidence collection. She photographed Marcus's unaccompanied minor paperwork, recorded a video statement describing the incident, and began compiling contact information from willing witnesses. Marcus had stopped crying, but remained withdrawn and quiet. The public humiliation had triggered a stress response that made his stutter more pronounced, creating a cycle that would take time and therapy to overcome. Dr. Thompson recognized the signs of trauma response and was already planning the psychological support Marcus would need. Elena Rodriguez approached Dr. Thompson with a business card and additional information. "I'm a special education teacher," she explained. "I've worked with hundreds of children who have speech disorders. What that flight attendant did was not just cruel, it was illegal under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have grounds for both civil rights violations and emotional distress claims." Dr. Thompson thanked Elena and added her contact information to the growing list of witnesses. The professional validation from an education expert strengthened her documentation and provided expert testimony for any future legal proceedings. Back in the galley, Rebecca Anderson was beginning to understand the magnitude of her mistake. Other flight attendants were giving her cold shoulders, and Jennifer Walsh had made it clear that her behavior was unacceptable and potentially career-ending. Rebecca attempted to minimize the situation by claiming she had misunderstood Marcus's needs. "I didn't know he had a real speech problem," Rebecca said defensively to Jennifer. "I thought he was just being difficult." Jennifer's response was sharp and uncompromising. "It doesn't matter what you thought. Your job is to treat every passenger with respect, especially children. What you did was cruel and completely against our training." The social media explosion was accelerating beyond anyone's expectations. Celebrity activists, disability rights organizations, and major news outlets were picking up the story. The original hashtag #HorizonShame was trending nationally, and new hashtags like speech rights and protect our children were gaining momentum. Comedian and disability advocate Josh Blue, who has cerebral palsy, retweeted the video with his own commentary. "This is exactly why representation matters. When you don't see disability as normal, you treat disabled people as abnormal. This flight attendant should be fired immediately." His tweet alone generated 15,000 retweets within an hour. At Horizon Airways headquarters in Denver, the crisis management team was scrambling to respond to the rapidly developing situation. Chief Marketing Officer Patricia Williams received the first alert about trending negative mentions at 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time, just 90 minutes after the incident occurred. Patricia immediately called an emergency meeting with legal counsel, human resources, and customer service leadership. The initial reports were fragmented, but the pattern was clear. A Horizon employee had mistreated a child with a disability, and the incident was going viral across multiple platforms. Legal counsel Amanda Foster pulled up the videos that were spreading online and watched them with growing alarm. "This is clear disability discrimination," she announced to the room. "We're looking at potential ADA violations, civil rights lawsuits, and massive public relations damage.
The fact that it involves a child makes it exponentially worse. Human Resources Director Michael Chen was already pulling Rebecca Anderson's employment file. She's been with us 18 months, 2 previous customer service complaints, both resolved through additional training. No prior incidents involving discrimination, but her performance reviews show ongoing attitude issues. The team was working without knowing that their largest shareholder's grandson was the victim in the incident. Theodore Beaumont Thompson was in meetings all afternoon and hadn't yet seen the news coverage that would soon reach him through multiple channels. Meanwhile, disability rights attorney Sarah Martinez was already analyzing the legal implications of the incident. As the founder of the Disability Justice Project, she had been following similar cases for years and recognized this as a potential landmark case for speech disorder discrimination. Martinez began reaching out to her network of advocates and legal experts. The incident represented several concerning trends: discrimination against children with disabilities, lack of proper training for service industry employees, and the intersection of disability rights with racial discrimination. Dr. Thompson received a call from her father while the plane was still in flight. Theodore Beaumont Thompson had finally seen the news alerts and social media posts about Horizon Airways, though he didn't yet realize his grandson was involved. "Keisha, I'm seeing reports about some incident on Horizon Airways," Theodore said over the airplane's Wi-Fi phone system. "Wasn't Marcus flying Horizon today?" Dr. Thompson's voice was tight with controlled anger as she explained what had happened to Marcus. The revelation that his beloved grandson was the victim in the viral discrimination case hit Theodore like a physical blow. He immediately understood that this wasn't just a family crisis. It was a corporate crisis that he had the power to address directly through his majority ownership position.
"I'm calling an emergency board meeting," Theodore told his daughter. "This airline will answer for what they did to Marcus, and changes will be implemented immediately." Dr. Thompson could hear the transformation in her father's voice, from concerned grandfather to powerful businessman ready for war. The social media momentum continued building throughout the afternoon. Disability advocacy organizations, civil rights groups, and concerned citizens were sharing the videos and demanding accountability from Horizon Airways. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and calls for boycotts. Television news producers were beginning to pick up the story for evening broadcasts. The visual evidence was compelling. The victim was sympathetic, and the broader themes of disability discrimination resonated with audiences. Several major networks had assigned reporters to meet Flight 847 when it landed in Los Angeles. As the plane began its descent into LAX, passengers were buzzing with anticipation about what would happen next. Many had shared their own recordings and witness accounts, creating a comprehensive documentation of Rebecca Anderson's behavior that would be impossible for Horizon Airways to dispute or minimize. Dr. Thompson looked at Marcus, who was still quiet but no longer crying. She knew that the worst part of their ordeal was over, but the fight for accountability and systemic change was just beginning. What neither she nor Marcus realized was that they now had the most powerful ally possible in their struggle for justice, the man who controlled nearly half of the airline that had wronged them. The plane touched down at LAX at 5:45 p.m. Pacific time, and as passengers prepared to disembark, they had no idea they were about to witness the beginning of one of the most significant corporate reckonings in airline industry history. Theodore Beaumont Thompson's corner office on the 42nd floor of the Chrysler Building commanded a spectacular view of Manhattan, but he wasn't looking at the skyline. Instead, he was staring at his phone screen, watching the video of his grandson being humiliated by a Horizon Airways employee for the 5th time. Each viewing made his anger burn hotter and more focused. His assistant, Margaret Foster, had cleared his schedule for the remainder of the day after Theodore's explosive reaction to learning about the incident. In 30 years of working for him, Margaret had never seen her normally composed boss display such raw fury.
When Theodore Beaumont Thompson was angry, corporations trembled, but this was different. This was personal. Theodore's first call was to Harrison Blake, his chief legal counsel and longtime friend. "Harrison, I need you to compile everything we have on Horizon Airways immediately. Financial records, board composition, management structure, employee policies, everything. I want a complete picture within 2 hours." Harrison had heard the controlled rage in Theodore's voice and knew better than ask questions. He had worked on the Horizon Airways acquisition 5 years earlier and understood the extent of Theodore's control over the company. "Consider it done, TB. Should I alert the litigation team?" "Not yet," Theodore replied. "First, I'm going to give them an opportunity to do the right thing. If they refuse, then we move to Phase 2. Harrison understood the implication. Theodore Beaumont Thompson's Phase 2 involved destroying companies that crossed him. Meanwhile, at Los Angeles International Airport, a crowd of reporters and camera crews had gathered at Gate 47. Word had spread through media networks that the viral discrimination incident would be arriving on Flight 847, and news directors recognized the story's potential impact. The visual of a 12-year-old boy being met by reporters after experiencing public humiliation would be powerful television. Dr. Keisha Thompson was preparing Marcus for the media attention they would face upon deplaning. The flight crew had informed passengers that there was significant press interest in the incident, and several travelers had offered to serve as protective escorts for Marcus through the terminal. Elena Rodriguez had remained near Dr. Thompson throughout the landing process, providing both moral support and professional expertise about the legal implications of what had occurred. As a special education teacher, she understood the lasting impact that public humiliation could have on a child with a speech disorder. "We need to control the narrative," Elena advised Dr. Thompson. "Marcus should be seen as a brave young man who stood up for his rights, not as a victim who was broken by this experience." The framing would be crucial for both Marcus's emotional recovery and any legal proceedings that might follow. Rebecca Anderson was escorted off the plane through a service exit to avoid the media crowd. Her union representative, David Martinez, was waiting to brief her on the severity of the situation and the likely consequences of her actions. Rebecca's career with Horizon Airways was effectively over, but the legal and financial implications were just beginning. As passengers began deplaning through the jet bridge, Dr. Thompson received an unexpected call from an unknown number. "Dr. Thompson, this is Patricia Williams, Chief Marketing Officer for Horizon Airways. I'm calling to personally apologize for the incident involving your son and to discuss how we can make this right." Dr. Thompson's response was measured but firm. "Miss Williams, what happened to my son was not just an incident. It was deliberate discrimination against a child with a disability. Your employee mocked his speech disorder in front of dozens of passengers and caused him significant emotional trauma."
Patricia Williams had been hoping for a private resolution that could minimize the corporate damage, but Dr. Thompson's tone suggested that approach was unlikely to succeed. "We're prepared to offer significant compensation and ensure that the employee involved faces appropriate consequences," Patricia said. Before Dr. Thompson could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her father. "I need to take this call," she told Patricia Williams. "We can continue this conversation later, but I want you to understand that my son deserves more than compensation. He deserves genuine change in your company's policies and training." Theodore Beaumont Thompson's voice was calm when Dr. Thompson answered his call, but she could hear the underlying steel in his tone. "Keisha, I've been in contact with Horizon's board of directors. There will be an emergency meeting tonight in Denver. I want you and Marcus to fly there immediately on a private jet so you can address the board directly." Dr. Thompson was surprised by her father's swift action, but grateful for his support. "Dad, I appreciate your help, but I'm not sure Marcus is ready for that kind of confrontation. He's been through enough today." Theodore's response revealed the full extent of his plans for Horizon Airways. "This isn't just about confrontation, Keisha. This is about transformation.
Marcus's experience represents a systemic failure that goes far beyond one employee's behavior. I intend to use my position as majority shareholder to implement comprehensive changes that will prevent this from happening to any other child. The revelation that her father was Horizon Airways' majority shareholder stunned Dr. Thompson. She had known about his various business investments, but hadn't realized the extent of his control over the airline that had wronged Marcus. "Dad, you own Horizon Airways?" she asked. 47%, Theodore confirmed. Enough to control board decisions and executive appointments. Tonight's meeting will determine whether Horizon's current leadership is capable of implementing the changes necessary to rebuild this company's culture, or whether new leadership is required. At Horizon Airways headquarters in Denver, CEO Jonathan Mitchell was facing the worst crisis of his career. The viral videos had been viewed millions of times, major news networks were running the story, and the company's stock price had dropped 12% in after-hours trading. What Jonathan didn't yet know was that his largest shareholder was planning his removal. The emergency board meeting was called for 8 p.m. Mountain Time, ostensibly to address the public relations crisis and develop a response strategy. Board members were flying in from across the country, and the legal department was preparing briefing materials about potential liability and damage control measures. Chief Financial Officer Rachel Green was analyzing the financial implications of the incident when she received an unexpected call from Theodore Beaumont Thompson's office. Margaret Foster was arranging logistics for the evening meeting and ensuring that proper facilities would be available for video conferencing with other stakeholders. Mr. Thompson will be attending tonight's meeting personally. He's also bringing his daughter, Dr. Keisha Thompson, and her son Marcus to address the board directly about their experience. Rachel felt a chill of recognition. The victim in the viral video was Theodore Beaumont Thompson's grandson. The realization sent Rachel into immediate damage control mode. She called CEO Jonathan Mitchell with the devastating news that their largest shareholder's family had been the target of the discrimination incident. Jonathan's reaction was a string of profanity, followed by the recognition that his career was likely over. By 6 p.m. Pacific time, Theodore's private jet was ready for departure from LAX. Dr. Thompson had agreed to attend the board meeting after consulting with Marcus, who surprised her with his determination to confront the people responsible for Rebecca Anderson's behavior. "I want to tell them what it felt like," Marcus said, his stutter less pronounced now that he was with family and felt safe. "Mrs. Nguyen always says that speaking up for yourself is the best way to prevent stuttering from controlling your life." Elena Rodriguez had provided Dr. Thompson with detailed documentation of the incident and expert analysis of the discrimination that had occurred. She had also connected them with Sarah Martinez, the disability rights attorney, who would be available by video conference during the board meeting. As the private jet climbed into the evening sky over California, heading toward Denver and the confrontation that would reshape Horizon Airways, Theodore Beaumont Thompson was finalizing his strategy. He had built his business empire by acquiring underperforming companies and transforming them into industry leaders. Tonight, he would apply those same techniques to an airline that had failed his grandson. The difference was that this wasn't just business anymore. This was personal, and Theodore Beaumont Thompson had the power to ensure that Horizon Airways would either become a model for disability inclusion and employee training, or it would cease to exist as an independent company. Jonathan Mitchell and his leadership team had no idea that they were about to face not just a public relations crisis, but a corporate takeover orchestrated by a grandfather's love and a businessman's determination to create systemic change. The board meeting would determine whether Horizon Airways had a future, and if so, what that future would look like. The Horizon Airways boardroom on the 20th floor of their Denver headquarters had never felt smaller. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces reflecting various degrees of anxiety, confusion, and dread. The emergency meeting had been called with minimal explanation, and most members arrived expecting a standard crisis management discussion.
Theodore Beaumont Thompson entered the room at exactly 8 p.m., followed by Dr. Keisha Thompson and Marcus. The 12-year-old boy walked with quiet dignity, despite the ordeal he had endured earlier that day. Several board members recognized Theodore immediately, but the presence of his daughter and grandson puzzled those who hadn't yet connected the dots. CEO Jonathan Mitchell attempted to maintain control of the meeting by opening with prepared remarks about the day's incident and the company's commitment to investigating and addressing the situation. His voice betrayed his nervousness as he spoke without making eye contact with Theodore. "Before we discuss our response strategy," Jonathan began, "I want to acknowledge that we're facing a serious public relations challenge that requires immediate action. We've already placed the employee in question on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Theodore's interruption was quiet but commanding. "Jonathan, before you continue, I think the board should understand exactly who was victimized by your employee today." He placed his hand gently on Marcus's shoulder. "This is my grandson, Marcus Thompson. He's the child that your flight attendant chose to mock and humiliate because of his speech disorder." The room fell into stunned silence. Board members began to understand that this wasn't just a crisis management meeting, but a reckoning with their largest shareholder, whose family had been directly harmed by the company's failures. Dr. Thompson stepped forward to address the board directly. "My son is here tonight because he wants to tell you himself what your employee's actions meant to him. He's worked for years to overcome his stutter and build confidence in his communication. Today, one of your representatives destroyed that progress in front of dozens of strangers." Marcus approached the microphone that had been set up at the head of the table. His hands were steady now, and his voice carried a clarity that surprised even his mother. "My name is Marcus Thompson, and I have a stutter. It means that sometimes words get stuck when I try to talk, especially when I'm nervous or excited." He paused, using the breathing techniques Mrs. Gwen had taught him. "When I asked for water today, I wasn't trying to be difficult or funny. I was just trying to communicate the way my brain allows me to. The flight attendant thought I was making fun of her, but I was just being myself." The board members listened with growing discomfort as Marcus continued. "She told me to talk like a normal person, but this is how I talk normally. She said my parents should have taught me to speak properly, but I work with a speech therapist every week to improve my communication. She made fun of something I can't control and work very hard to manage." Board member Catherine Reynolds, who had a nephew with autism, was visibly emotional as Marcus spoke. The authenticity and dignity of his presentation made the cruelty of Rebecca Anderson's behavior even more stark and inexcusable. Marcus concluded his statement by looking directly at CEO Mitchell. "I don't want other kids to feel the way I felt today. I don't want anyone to think that having a disability means they deserve to be treated badly. That's why I'm here tonight, to ask you to make sure this never happens again." The room remained silent for several moments after Marcus finished speaking. Theodore allowed the impact of his grandson's words to settle before presenting his demands to the board. "Marcus has shown more courage and wisdom tonight than your entire corporate leadership demonstrated today," Theodore said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Now I'm going to tell you exactly what changes will be implemented at this airline, and you're going to vote to approve every single one of them." He distributed a detailed document to each board member. The list of requirements was comprehensive and non-negotiable. Immediate termination of Rebecca Anderson and any supervisor who had previously dismissed complaints about her behavior. Mandatory disability awareness training for all customer-facing employees. Creation of a chief disability officer reporting directly to the CEO. Implementation of clear protocols for assisting passengers with disabilities. Establishment of a passenger advocacy program with independent oversight, and partnership with disability rights organizations for ongoing policy development. Board member Robert Foster attempted to moderate Theodore's demands. These changes would require significant financial investment and operational restructuring. Perhaps we could implement them gradually over the next year or two. Theodore's response was immediate and uncompromising. Robert, you seem to misunderstand the situation. I'm not making suggestions or opening negotiations. I'm informing you of the changes that will be implemented immediately, or I will exercise my majority control to replace this entire board and executive team. CFO Rachel Green had been calculating the financial implications of Theodore's demands during the presentation. The comprehensive changes would cost approximately $15 million in the first year, but the alternative of continued discrimination lawsuits and reputation damage would be far more expensive. Chairman Patricia Davis recognized that resistance was futile given Theodore's ownership position and the moral clarity of his position. The board had no choice but to approve the demanded changes, and delaying would only make their eventual compliance appear more grudging and insincere.
I move that we approve all of Mr. Thompson's requirements and authorize immediate implementation, Patricia announced. The motion was seconded immediately by Catherine Reynolds, and the vote was unanimous, despite several members' obvious reluctance. Theodore wasn't finished. Jonathan, your leadership enabled the culture that traumatized my grandson. You'll be submitting your resignation effective immediately. Rachel Green will serve as interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership committed to these values. Jonathan Mitchell's face flushed with anger and humiliation, but he recognized that fighting Theodore would only prolong his professional destruction. His resignation would at least allow him to claim some dignity in his departure, rather than face the public humiliation of being fired for enabling discrimination. The meeting continued for another hour as Theodore outlined specific implementation timelines and accountability measures. Sarah Martinez, the disability rights attorney, joined the video conference to provide legal guidance and ensure that the policy changes would meet federal compliance standards. Dr. Thompson addressed the board about the broader implications of their decision. This isn't just about my son, or even about Horizon Airways. This is about recognizing that people with disabilities have the same right to dignity and respect as anyone else. The changes you're implementing tonight will affect thousands of passengers and employees for years to come. Elena Rodriguez also participated via video conference, providing her expert perspective as a special education teacher about the training programs that would be most effective for airline employees. Her recommendations included scenario-based training, disability simulation exercises, and ongoing education about different types of disabilities and appropriate responses. As the meeting concluded, Theodore made one final announcement that stunned the room. To ensure our commitment to these changes is taken seriously, I'm establishing the Marcus Thompson Foundation for Transportation Accessibility with an initial endowment of $25 million. This foundation will monitor compliance with our new policies and advocate for disability rights throughout the transportation industry. Marcus looked up at his grandfather with surprise and pride. Having his name associated with positive change, rather than just victimization, felt empowering and healing. The foundation would transform his traumatic experience into a force for helping other people with disabilities. The board members began filing out of the room, many stopping to speak quietly with Marcus and express their personal apologies for what had happened. Their individual responses ranged from genuine remorse to calculated political positioning, but the collective message was clear. Horizon Airways would be fundamentally different going forward. Theodore requested a private moment with the remaining leadership team to discuss implementation details and personnel changes. The transformation he was demanding would require new hiring, extensive training programs, and cultural changes that went beyond policy modifications. As Marcus and his mother waited in an adjacent conference room, he reflected on the events of the day. The morning had begun with excitement about flying alone to visit his father. Now he was at the center of a corporate transformation that would affect an entire industry's approach to disability accommodation. Dr. Thompson watched her son process the day's experiences and was impressed by his resilience and maturity. The trauma of Rebecca Anderson's behavior would require ongoing therapy and support, but Marcus had demonstrated remarkable strength in speaking to the board about his experience. The private jet back to New York was scheduled for departure at midnight, giving the family time to ensure that immediate implementation of the agreed changes would begin the next morning. Theodore had already called his legal team to begin drafting the necessary documentation and hiring procedures for the new positions. As they prepared to leave Denver, Marcus asked his grandfather a question that surprised both adults. "Grandpa, do you think that flight attendant learned anything today, or did she just get angry about losing her job?" Theodore considered the question carefully before responding. "Some people learn from their mistakes, Marcus, and others just blame everyone else for the consequences. What matters is that we've created a system that won't allow her behavior to hurt other children, regardless of whether she learned anything or not." The flight back to New York would give them time to process the magnitude of what had been accomplished in a single evening and begin planning for the long-term work of ensuring that the changes at Horizon Airways would be implemented effectively and permanently. 6 months after the viral incident that transformed Horizon Airways, the changes were visible from the moment passengers entered any of the airline's terminals. Digital displays in multiple languages included information about accessibility services, and specially trained customer service representatives wearing bright blue badges that read "Accessibility Advocate" were stationed throughout departure gates. Rebecca Anderson's termination had been swift and uncompromising. Within 24 hours of the emergency board meeting, she was escorted from Horizon premises and banned from all company property. Her union representative had attempted to file a grievance claiming unfair dismissal, but the video evidence and witness testimonies made her case impossible to defend. The legal consequences for Rebecca extended beyond employment termination. The Department of Justice had filed federal civil rights charges against her for disability discrimination, making her case a landmark prosecution under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Her trial was scheduled for the following spring, with potential penalties including fines and community service requirements. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the disability rights attorney who had become involved in Marcus's case, was using Rebecca's prosecution as a precedent for similar cases throughout the service industry. The federal government's willingness to pursue criminal charges sent a clear message that disability discrimination would face serious legal consequences. Interim CEO Rachel Green had exceeded all expectations in implementing Theodore's mandated changes. Her background in operations management proved invaluable in restructuring employee training programs and creating new policies that prioritized passenger dignity alongside operational efficiency. The position of Chief Disability Officer had been filled by Dr. James Rivera, a former Department of Transportation official with extensive experience in accessibility compliance. His first initiative was a comprehensive audit of all Horizon facilities and procedures, identifying hundreds of improvements that could enhance the travel experience for passengers with various disabilities. Employee training programs had been completely redesigned with input from disability advocacy organizations and special education experts. Elena Rodriguez had been hired as a consultant to develop scenario-based training modules that helped flight attendants and gate agents understand appropriate responses to passengers with different types of disabilities. The training included mandatory sessions on speech disorders, with specific modules about stuttering, autism-related communication differences, and other conditions that might affect passenger interaction. Employees learned that patience and respect were not just courteous responses, but legal requirements under federal disability law. Marcus Thompson had become an unexpected advocate for disability rights throughout the transportation industry. The Marcus Thompson Foundation for Transportation Accessibility had partnered with airports, airlines, and advocacy organizations to develop best practices that extended far beyond Horizon Airways. His public speaking had improved dramatically through continued work with Mrs. Nguyen and the confidence he had gained from turning his traumatic experience into positive change. Marcus now traveled regularly to speak at conferences and training events, sharing his story and educating transportation professionals about the passenger experience from a disability perspective. The Foundation's first major initiative was the development of communication cards that passengers with speech disorders could present to airline employees. The cards explained different types of speech differences and provided guidance for appropriate responses, eliminating the misunderstandings that had led to Marcus's humiliation. Dr. Keisha Thompson had taken a sabbatical from her medical practice to serve as the Foundation's medical advisor, ensuring that their advocacy work was grounded in current research and clinical understanding of various disabilities. Her transition from physician to advocate had been personally fulfilling and professionally challenging in unexpected ways. Theodore Beaumont Thompson's approach to corporate transformation had attracted attention from business schools and management consultants studying rapid organizational change. His willingness to prioritize moral principles over short-term profits had resulted in improved employee morale, customer satisfaction, and ultimately stronger financial performance. Horizon Airways' stock price had recovered and exceeded pre-incident levels within 4 months of implementing the accessibility initiatives. Customer loyalty surveys showed significant improvement, and the airline had received multiple awards from disability advocacy organizations for their industry-leading policies. The transformation had extended beyond disability accommodation to broader customer service excellence. Employees who had been trained to treat passengers with disabilities respectfully found that their overall communication skills and empathy had improved across all passenger interactions. Flight attendant Jennifer Walsh, who had witnessed Rebecca's behavior and reported it to management, had been promoted to lead the new passenger advocacy program. Her role involved investigating customer service complaints and ensuring that company policies were being implemented consistently across all routes in cruise. Jennifer's first quarterly report documented a 78% reduction in customer service complaints related to disability accommodation. More importantly, passenger satisfaction scores among travelers with disabilities had increased from below industry average to the highest ratings in the domestic aviation market. The legal settlement between the Thompson family and Horizon Airways had been structured to fund ongoing accessibility improvements rather than simply providing monetary compensation. The agreement included provisions for annual compliance audits and passenger feedback systems that would ensure sustained commitment to the new standards. Elena Rodriguez had been hired full-time as Horizon's Director of Disability Training and Education. Her expertise in special education had been invaluable in developing programs that went beyond basic compliance to create genuine understanding and empathy among airline employees. Elena's team had created a comprehensive library of training materials that other airlines were now purchasing and adapting for their own use. The Horizon model was becoming an industry standard for disability accommodation training throughout the transportation sector. Captain William Hayes, who had been piloting Flight 847 during the original incident, had become an advocate for crew training improvements throughout the aviation industry. His testimony before the Federal Aviation Administration had contributed to new regulations requiring disability awareness training for all commercial airline employees.
The broader impact of Marcus's case extended to other transportation modes as well. Bus companies, train services, and ride-sharing platforms had all implemented new policies and training programs to prevent similar incidents and improve accessibility for passengers with disabilities. Disability rights organizations had used the momentum from Marcus's case to push for stronger enforcement of existing laws and expanded protections for people with speech disorders. The visibility of his story had educated the public about stuttering and other communication differences in ways that years of advocacy had not achieved. Mrs. Patricia Nguyen, Marcus's speech therapist, had been invited to consult with the foundation on developing resources for other children who experienced discrimination due to their speech disorders. Her clinical expertise, combined with Marcus's lived experience, created powerful educational tools for schools, healthcare providers, and service industries. The academic community had also taken notice of the case's implications for corporate social responsibility and stakeholder capitalism. Business schools were teaching case studies about Theodore's approach to using shareholder power for social change rather than purely financial returns. Rebecca Anderson's story had become a cautionary tale about the personal and professional consequences of discrimination. Unable to find employment in the service industry due to her notoriety, she had been forced to relocate and change careers entirely. Her experience served as a warning to other employees about the serious repercussions of discriminatory behavior. The Federal Aviation Administration had implemented new reporting requirements for airlines to track and publicly disclose data about passenger complaints related to disability accommodation. This transparency measure was directly inspired by Marcus's case and the need for industry-wide accountability. Marcus's relationship with his grandfather had deepened through their shared advocacy work. Theodore had found unexpected fulfillment in using his business expertise for social justice causes, and their collaboration had strengthened family bonds while creating meaningful change for thousands of people. Dr. Thompson's decision to document the entire experience in a book had resulted in a best-selling memoir that combined personal narrative with policy analysis. The book's proceeds funded scholarships for students with disabilities pursuing careers in transportation and hospitality management. The one-year anniversary of the incident was marked by a symposium at the National Press Club where Marcus, now 13 and increasingly confident in his public speaking, addressed an audience of transportation industry leaders, disability advocates, and government officials about the ongoing need for inclusion and accessibility improvements. As Marcus concluded his anniversary speech, his stutter barely noticeable due to his improved confidence and communication skills. He reflected on how a traumatic experience had been transformed into a powerful force for positive change. The boy who had been humiliated for asking for water on an airplane was now helping to ensure that no other child would face similar discrimination. The resolution of Marcus's case had demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when moral clarity combined with sufficient power and determination. What had begun as one family's fight for dignity had become a movement that improved the travel experience for millions of people with disabilities across the country. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, Marcus Thompson stood at the podium of the United Nations headquarters in New York City, addressing the Global Summit on Transportation Accessibility. At 17, he had grown into a confident young man whose stutter, while still present, no longer defined him or limited his ability to advocate for others. The boy who had once struggled to ask for water on an airplane was now speaking to representatives from 43 countries about the fundamental human right to travel with dignity. His presentation combined personal narrative with policy recommendations that had been shaped by years of working with disability advocates, transportation officials, and fellow travelers with disabilities. "When I was 12 years old," Marcus began, his voice clear and measured, "I learned that asking for water could be an act of courage. Not because water is difficult to obtain, but because society had taught an airline employee that my way of communicating was worth mocking rather than respecting." The audience, composed of transportation ministers, disability advocates, and international development officials, listened intently as Marcus described the broader implications of his experience. "That incident taught me that individual discrimination is always a symptom of systemic failures.
One person's cruelty revealed an entire industry's neglect of passenger dignity. Marcus had just graduated from Harvard Westlake School in Los Angeles, where he had spent his high school years living with his father while continuing his advocacy work through the foundation. His college applications had been overwhelmingly successful, with acceptances to Stanford, MIT, and Harvard, among others. He had chosen to defer enrollment for a gap year to focus on expanding the foundation's international programs. The Marcus Thompson Foundation for Transportation Accessibility had grown from Theodore's initial $25 million endowment to a $40 million organization that operated programs across North America and was expanding into Europe and Asia. The foundation's work had evolved beyond airline policies to encompass all forms of public transportation, from city buses to international rail systems.
Dr. Keisha Thompson had transitioned fully from medicine to advocacy, serving as the foundation's executive director while pursuing a doctorate in public policy at Georgetown University. Her research focused on the intersection of healthcare and transportation accessibility, examining how medical appointments and treatments became inaccessible when transportation systems failed to accommodate people with disabilities. Her relationship with Marcus had deepened through their shared work, though she remained vigilant about maintaining appropriate boundaries between her roles as mother and professional colleague. Marcus's maturity and leadership abilities had impressed international development experts who worked with the foundation on accessibility projects in developing countries. Theodore Beaumont Thompson had surprised the business world by gradually transitioning from private equity to social impact investing. His success in transforming Horizon Airways had attracted other investors interested in using shareholder power to drive positive social change rather than purely financial returns. The Beaumont Social Impact Fund, launched 3 years after Marcus's incident, managed over $2 billion in investments focused on companies committed to disability inclusion, environmental sustainability, and worker equity. Theodore's approach had proven that moral leadership could enhance, rather than compromise, financial performance. His relationship with Marcus had become one of the most meaningful aspects of his later career. The grandfather who had built a business empire found deeper satisfaction in teaching his grandson about strategic philanthropy and social change than he had ever experienced in traditional corporate acquisitions. Elena Rodriguez had become an internationally recognized expert in disability accommodation training for service industries. Her methodologies, developed initially for Horizon Airways, were now being implemented by transportation companies, hotels, restaurants, and retail chains throughout the world. The Rodriguez training model had been adopted by the International Air Transport Association as the global standard for airline disability accommodation training. Elena's team now provided consulting services to transportation authorities in over 20 countries, adapting their approaches to different cultural contexts while maintaining core principles of dignity and inclusion. Her work had been recognized with numerous awards, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which she had received alongside Marcus in a ceremony celebrating advances in disability rights. Elena often reflected on how witnessing one act of cruelty had led to a career dedicated to preventing similar experiences for millions of travelers. Horizon Airways had become the gold standard for accessibility in the aviation industry. Under the permanent leadership of CEO Maria Santos, who had been recruited from the Department of Transportation, the airline had maintained its commitment to the policies implemented in the aftermath of Marcus's case. The airline's accessibility programs had generated significant customer loyalty and positive publicity, resulting in market share growth and improved profitability. Horizon's stock price had outperformed industry averages for 4 consecutive years, demonstrating that ethical business practices could enhance rather than undermine commercial success. Dr. James Rivera, the Chief Disability Officer position created after Marcus's incident, had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Passenger Experience. His department had become a model for other airlines, and Rivera frequently spoke at industry conferences about the business case for comprehensive accessibility programs. The broader transportation industry had undergone fundamental changes as a result of the precedent set by Marcus's case and the subsequent advocacy efforts.
The Americans with Disabilities Act had been strengthened through new regulations that provided clearer guidance and stronger enforcement mechanisms for transportation accessibility. Federal transportation funding now included mandatory accessibility compliance requirements that applied to airlines, airports, mass transit systems, and intercity transportation providers. The financial incentives created by these requirements had accelerated accessibility improvements across all transportation modes. Marcus's influence extended beyond transportation policy to broader disability rights advocacy. His speeches at schools and universities had inspired a new generation of young people to consider disability inclusion as a fundamental aspect of social justice rather than a specialized concern affecting only people with disabilities. The communication cards developed by the Foundation had been translated into 12 languages and were being used by transportation systems throughout Europe, Asia, and South America. The simple innovation of explaining speech differences proactively had prevented countless misunderstandings and discriminatory responses. Mrs. Patricia Nigen had collaborated with the Foundation to develop speech therapy resources specifically designed for children who had experienced discrimination or trauma related to their communication differences. Her clinical research had demonstrated that advocacy training improved both communication skills and self-confidence among young people with speech disorders. The Nigen protocol for post-discrimination therapy had been adopted by speech therapy programs in major metropolitan areas and was being studied for implementation in rural communities where access to specialized services was limited. Her work had shown that empowerment through advocacy could be as therapeutically valuable as traditional speech therapy techniques. Rebecca Anderson's story had become a cautionary tale that was included in diversity training programs throughout the service industry. Her federal conviction for disability discrimination had resulted in community service requirements that included speaking to hospitality and transportation employees about the personal and professional consequences of discriminatory behavior.
Rebecca's mandated presentations were uncomfortable for both her and her audiences, but they provided stark testimony about how individual prejudices could destroy careers and cause lasting harm to vulnerable people. Her experience served as a powerful deterrent to employees who might otherwise dismiss diversity training as unnecessary. The legal precedent established by federal prosecution of Rebecca's case had been cited in dozens of subsequent disability discrimination cases throughout the service industry. Prosecutors now had clear guidance for pursuing criminal charges in cases involving deliberate discrimination against people with disabilities. Sarah Martinez, the disability rights attorney who had provided legal guidance during Marcus's case, had been appointed to the federal bench as a district court judge specializing in civil rights cases. Her judicial decisions continued to strengthen legal protections for people with disabilities while establishing clear consequences for individuals and organizations that violated those protections. The academic study of Marcus's case had generated research in multiple disciplines, from business ethics to social psychology to public policy analysis. Universities were teaching case studies that examined how individual trauma could be transformed into systemic change through strategic advocacy and appropriate use of power. Marcus's story had been featured in documentaries, academic papers, and policy studies that examined the role of privilege and power in advancing social justice causes. Critics noted that not every family had access to the resources that enabled the Thompsons to create widespread change, while supporters argued that their example demonstrated how privilege could be used responsibly for broader social benefit. International development organizations had begun incorporating transportation accessibility into their infrastructure projects in developing countries. The Foundation's consulting work had helped establish accessibility standards for transportation systems in countries that were building or expanding their public transit networks. As Marcus concluded his speech at the United Nations, he reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him from a traumatized 12-year-old to an internationally recognized advocate for human rights. The stutter that had made him vulnerable to discrimination had become a source of strength and authenticity in his public speaking. My experience taught me that vulnerability can become power when it is channeled through purpose, Marcus told the international audience. The flight attendant who mocked my stutter thought she was pointing out my weakness. Instead, she revealed the weakness in systems that fail to protect human dignity. The standing ovation that followed Marcus's speech lasted nearly 5 minutes. Delegates from countries around the world approached him afterward to discuss collaboration on accessibility initiatives that could benefit millions of travelers with disabilities. That evening, as Marcus, his mother, and his grandfather shared dinner at a restaurant near the United Nations, they reflected on how completely their lives had been transformed by a single moment of cruelty on an airplane. What had begun as trauma had become a calling that gave meaning and purpose to their work. Marcus looked at his family and smiled. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had just accepted that flight attendant's behavior and stayed quiet. Dr. Thompson responded with maternal pride mixed with professional insight. You would have been protecting yourself in that moment, but you chose to protect every child who might face similar discrimination in the future. Theodore raised his glass in a toast to his grandson and daughter. You both taught me that the greatest return on any investment is the knowledge that you have made the world more just and compassionate. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Marcus received a text message from a 15-year-old girl in Ohio whose school had implemented new anti-bullying policies after learning about his advocacy work. The message simply read, "Thank you for showing me that my voice matters, even when it sounds different." Marcus showed the message to his family and smiled. This is why we do the work, not for recognition or awards, but for every person who discovers they deserve dignity and respect exactly as they are. The boy who had been mocked for asking for water had become a young man whose voice was changing the world one conversation at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.